or concluded my opening remarks by saying that any form of intimidation, any form of violence, any acts of arson, any acts of incitement is not a legitimate form of protest, and those who are responsible must be held accountable. And I think it's one thing, while we might disagree with plenty in this chamber, it's one thing that we have all condemned these acts, and we are all very clear that this is not a legitimate form of protest. So I might start my opening remarks then by, I think, agreeing again with colleagues that the vast majority of people across this country have been extremely welcoming to those who are fleeing war, who are fleeing persecution, irrespective of where they are coming from, who are fleeing starvation. And unfortunately, the world is a very different place than it was only a few short years ago. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of people on the move because of conflict that is happening, because of wars that we're not even aware of. And so I think as people, we automatically, I think, want to respond and to provide shelter and to support people. And we see that with communities coming together. We see that with people not coming together in protest, but actually responding to the needs of those seeking international protection and putting in place welcoming committees and others. And I don't think any group should ever be afraid to say that that's what they're doing. But we do have a challenge on our hands here. And Deputy O'Callaghan said this. We have, in a very short space of time, gone from about 3,000 to 4,000 people coming to this island seeking international protection to over 100,000 people in the last 2 years. And whether we like it or not, that has placed huge pressure not just on our accommodation system, but on our overall immigration system. And we are doing, and I am doing, and my colleagues are doing everything that we can to respond to it. And whether Deputy Oireachtas likes it or not, the fact that people are asking questions about the immigration system now is because we have an increase in people coming here. And it's my role and my responsibility to respond to those questions in the clearest, the most coherent and the most factual way. And that's making sure that we've invested in our immigration system. If I hadn't done that over the last 2 years, I'm sure the questions would be, why hadn't we done more? So we've almost doubled the staff that we have dealing with immigration queries. We've invested tens of millions of euro into our IT systems, moving many of our application processes online. We have advanced accelerated processes, in particular for safe countries, but obviously we need to make sure that we have the capacity to do those applications in a fast way. But I have no doubt that I will be reviewing those countries in the near future, and that there may be more added. But it's not just the safe countries that are in the accelerated process, it's actually the returns as well that are now in the accelerated process. And we will build up that system and that structure, because the Migration Pact that I will recommend and that I firmly believe we as a country should join means that every person will be in a much quicker application process, that anybody who applies, irrespective of whether they're from a safe country or not, will move into a much quicker scenario where they receive their first instance decision much more quickly than they do now, where they will be able to go through an appeal system much more quickly, where we have a more effective returns policy. At the moment, Dublin doesn't work, but there will be a better system in place whereby if a person who has international protection from another country seeks it in this country, that initial country will have no option but to accept them back, where that's not the case now. So there's a lot of work that has been done over the last number of years, not just to deal with the increase in people coming here, but to make sure that we are prepared and ready when we do sign up to the Migration Pact, which will be better coordinated, with have better cooperation and a system that I believe will be fair and firm to those who need our help. We're also making sure that those who are responsible for these crimes, that they are held accountable. And that is why so much of my actual contribution focused on Garda Síochána. Again, to move away from the fact that this is not legitimate protest. These are crimes, these are criminals committing those crimes. Anybody who aids or abets or withholds information, they are partly responsible as well. And so the only way that we can respond is through the law, to making sure that Gardaí have the resources, the ability to be able to tackle and to deal with these crimes. That's why we are doing, and I'm doing everything that I can to make sure that we have as many Gardaí as possible. That's why we're doing everything to encourage more people into Garda Síochána, to retain the numbers that we have. That's why we're investing in technology for Gardaí. That's why we'll have body cameras on Gardaí this year. That's why we're investing in CCTV. That's why we're investing in all the types of technology that Gardaí need to be able to do their job as effectively as possible. One of the challenges that Gardaí have is where you don't have CCTV for these types of crimes, where you don't have a witness who's come forward, where you don't have the evidence that you would normally need to prosecute these crimes. It's all circumstantial, it takes time, and so the Garda Commissioner has my full commitment that whatever resources they need to respond to these crimes, that they will have them. But it's not quick work, unfortunately, but the fact that we have arrests, the fact that there is progress, I really do hope that people will take that into account and do acknowledge the work that the Gardaí are doing, and I think any suggestion that Gardaí have not responded effectively simply because it's international protection applicants, I would absolutely reject that out of hand. But there's a lot of work that is underway, and we've spoken about much of that today. We talked about the steps that are taking place to try and move towards the new Migration Pact, but also there are discussions taking place at a European level to see what we do next with our friends, with those who have come from Ukraine as the Temporary Protection Directive comes to an end. How do we transition into something different? How do we support those who want to go home, if that is even possible as the war continues in Ukraine? How do we perhaps transition into another type of arrangement for those? And that's work that is underway. And Deputy Orlasken Curler, to your point, I suppose the directive itself and the Temporary Protection Directive was always going to be different to those seeking international protection, because we essentially agreed that those coming from Ukraine would be treated the same as European citizens, and that's, I suppose, inherently different to those who are coming seeking international protection. We want to provide protection, but it was agreed that it would be done in a way where they were treated as European citizens. Whether that's right or wrong, that's the legal parameter by which we had to work towards, but obviously we want to make sure that everybody, irrespective of where they're coming from, that they do get that protection and that they do get the support that they need. Deputies have talked about communication and language, that we all have a role here, and I have to stress we do all have a role here. Deputies talked about creating fertile breeding ground, while at the same time Deputy Carsey spoke about the need for people who are angry to divert their anger towards government. In the same sitting, Deputy Daly spoke about Deputy Kenny, who had experienced his own difficulties. There's many people across this House who have had acts of aggression towards them, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody in this House. So I think it's really important that when we're talking about communication, that we don't actually add to the challenges in this House by telling people on the outside to divert all of their anger towards government deputies. That's not what we should be doing here. The only people who are responsible for the vitriol, the only people who are responsible for these arson attacks, for these crimes, are those who are committing them, not anybody in this House, and I think it's very dangerous language to be using. In terms of online, and Deputy Daly started off with this, and I have to say I would agree, the spread of misinformation or disinformation, and now on top of that the use of artificial intelligence to in a way spread misinformation is absolutely frightening, and this is something that we were updated on by Europol recently, and the ability for any individual to use technology to now mimic another person, to pretend to be another individual, to spread disinformation is absolutely frightening. It's accessible to absolutely everybody, and that is why I personally believe that our Gardaí should not be working with an analogue system, that they should have all the digital tools available to them to be able to counter this type of technology and the way in which it's been used by those who wish to sow division, who wish to create fear, who wish to disrupt democracies as well. So this is not an issue that we are grappling on our own. This is a challenge that every single democracy across the world is dealing with, and I think we're doing a huge amount of work to try and counter it. We have Commission Amman that was established only in recent years, and their sole focus is to take on these social media companies where hateful or where information that is harmful is being spread. You obviously have investment in the technical bureaus within An Garda Síochána, where their sole focus is to make sure that they can investigate these types of crimes. Every type of opt-in that is available to us in recent years to better integrate with Europol and Interpol to counteract this type of disinformation is being taken up. So there's a lot of work that is being done, but again I would come back to the fact that we each have a role here to make sure that we are responsible in how we are communicating and how we are getting this information out to people. Finally, just in the area of protests, and I know there's often criticism around Gardaí and how they police these protests. There's not one deputy in this House has suggested that we shouldn't have peaceful protests, that we shouldn't allow people to protest in a peaceful way. And so with that there comes a challenge where people are protesting peacefully. Gardaí have to manage the situation as they see it. If a situation escalates, they do escalate their response, and we've seen that in recent times, but where people are protesting peacefully, it is often the case that it's infiltrated by those that have more sinister objectives, but they also don't cross the line, but they get into a community and they manage to sow a fear and a concern, and that's exactly what I spoke about on Tipperary Radio recently. And to correct Deputy McGrath's suggestion that I had in any way been critical of the women who had genuine concerns. What I said was there was an attempt to instill fear in that community. There was an attempt by some to link crime with migrants, to say that there is an increase in crime where you have an increase in migration. That's simply not the case, and I think we should all push back on that, and that's simply what I was stating in that regard. But more broadly, I think we're all of the same view. We utterly condemn the acts of arson and violence that are being committed by a small number of people. Gardaí have my full and absolute support in anything that they need to ensure that those who are accountable are held responsible. And I would say again, if anybody has any information on any of the attacks, not just in recent months, but over the last number of years, I would encourage them to come forward to the Gardaí with that information. Thank you.